Well, good morning, folks. We'll get started right away, and I want to welcome Alice Bast to join us. Alice has been on national TV and radio, and today she's hit it big time. She's made the Sunday Faith Forum at St. Thomas Church. So please join me in welcoming Alice.
So good to be here. Thanks for having me.
And I'm so glad that you've agreed to doing a more of a conversation, which makes it a little more live, and instead of just talking at us, we have a chance to converse. I've learned, especially through walking the Camino de Santiago and the Camino de Santiago de Compostela in Spain, that at the essence of life are conversations and walking side beside people and being able to talk about important things in our lives. And few things could be more important in your life and in the lives of 1 out of every 133 Americans who suffer from celiac disease. Let me just mention a little bit of background about Alice. Alice is the founder and CEO of Beyond Celiac, a patient-centric organization serving 2.5 million members of the celiac disease community. As I said, 1 out of 133 people in the United States suffers from celiac, and many of us here have a family member who share that and struggle with that, and we're trying to support them in every way we can. Pursuing her passion, Alice launched Beyond Celiac to ensure that no one would have to suffer undiagnosed celiac disease as she has. Alice is a noted expert in the celiac disease and is much sought after speaker. She's led the organization for 14 years, representing the patient's voice in key government, research, and industry venues, and travels around the country to make presentations, speaking nationally to a range of healthcare company workshops and conferences for hospitals and pharmaceutical companies. She's helped to press the case for increased research into celiac disease. Beyond Celiac has a unique patient engagement model which she holds up to those in the medical community and far beyond. The organization is a national leader in advocating for celiac disease research, and Alice is noted for her contributions in the best interests of the community with the prestigious 2010 Philadelphia Award, and as a woman who is pioneering the future and changing the face of leadership in Philadelphia with Philadelphia Magazine's prestigious 2017 Trailblazer Award. So we're delighted to have you here, to have you tell a little bit about your story and how you've built out this organization and what it's like for folks to deal with celiac and what can be done to support them, and also to make changes in restaurants and in other places, university cafeterias, to make their life more normative and to help their health be vibrant. We met, by the way, 20 years ago, swimming laps at the Penland Swimming Club. And
yes, we did. We both like to swim.
It's a great sport. Tell us a little bit about you, Alice. What events brought you here to be with us today?
You know, that's a great question, Merrick. Like all of us in this room, right, we all have a journey. We all have, an area of passion. And for me, ever since I was a little girl, I wanted to be a doctor, actually. That was my quest in life, to be a healer, to be a doctor. And then what happened along the way, you think back to milestones in your life, and there's kind of 2 milestones that I think about. One was when I was in high school. I received the Community Service Award for the entire township. So I had a heart in community service. Now I don't think of it that way, but I really have always been someone that wants to solve problems. And at the time, our lake in our local neighborhood was polluted, and I ended up, because I saw the ducks swimming in trash, I ended up cleaning up the lake. When I got to University of Pennsylvania, I was a pre-med student and accepted to medical school, but my mom died of pancreatic cancer my last year in college, and I decided that I was not going to pursue a career in medicine, and instead pursued a career in working for a company now called Siemens, and got married to my husband, William, and my mother-in-law is right there in this audience. And what happened, we had our first daughter. Her name's Elizabeth, and she was born very healthy. But then I took a trip to Mexico, and I got a parasite, and never got better. And for 8 long years, went from doctor to doctor, and whatever the symptom was, so if it was migraine headaches, if it was neurologic symptoms, they treated me for the symptom rather than the underlying cause. And actually, there's another coincidence with the Penn Lynn Club, is there was a veterinarian at the Penn Lynn Club who saw that I had kept losing weight, and I had a full-term stillborn child. I had 3 miscarriages, and then our youngest daughter was born at 2 pounds. And at that point in time, I still continued to lose weight. And this veterinarian said, you know, it might be the fact that the gluten is bothering you, and that there's this disease that sometimes animals have, that grains affect them. And go ask the doctor to test you for celiac disease. So I went back to the doctor, and this was Dr. 23, okay? 23 doctors later, 8-year quest, and the doctor said, you're too tall. I'm not going to test you for celiac disease because that's one of the symptoms. And I said, well, what's the test? And he said, it's a blood test. And I said, here's my arm. You've done every other test. No, please test me. And he tested me, and sure enough, the blood test came back positive, and I was diagnosed with celiac disease. And at that time, you know, there weren't any gluten-free products on supermarket shelves like you see around this country. And you know, there was another time here at St. Thomas Church where Will and I were sitting. We were at a christening, and I was pregnant with the stillborn, Emily, and I did not feel that movement. So when I think about the times in my life and how, you know, potentially my mother could have died of undiagnosed celiac disease because she died of pancreatic cancer, which is one of the cancers linked to celiac disease, and losing a child, I felt that there needed to be a national organization, somebody to raise awareness and advance research in celiac disease. And I went back to University of Pennsylvania at night and found that there were national support groups, but there was no national organization looking to really advance the field.
Wow.
So that was my journey.
It's a profound journey. It has some similarities where our daughter Marguerite and I went down to be part of our mission trip to Our Little Roses in San Pedro Sula. And we both got very sick down there, but that's when it basically surfaced that she had something that she had to address, and that led to the discovery that she was dealing with celiac disease as well. Before you met with the veterinarian, had you ever heard about celiac disease?
You know what? I never heard the word celiac disease. I didn't really even know what an autoimmune disease is. You know, celiac disease is a genetic autoimmune disease, which means it's hereditary. It's actually the most common autoimmune disease, but I'd never even heard of it. And at the time, before 2003, the medical profession thought that you had to be a child to have celiac disease. So typically they would think of somebody that's malnourished, has a big pot belly, and they would never think of someone, you know, who's 5'9", coming into the doctor's office with celiac disease. And that's why they didn't immediately test me, because I didn't fit that profile.
Mm-hmm. What are some of the key symptoms that reveal that someone has celiac?
So on everybody's table, you can see this. This is a brochure at Beyond Celiac, and some of the key, that's why it's confusing. There's several hundred symptoms of celiac disease, and many of them are digestive symptoms. So the more common symptoms are things like diarrhea, constipation, bloating, and then in kids, it's failure to thrive, so they don't grow properly. But there's neurologic symptoms, there's migraine headaches, and then some people tend to have no symptoms at all, but then end up getting long-term health consequences such as cancer and other autoimmune diseases. So if you have someone in your family that has celiac disease, it's extremely important that you get tested.
You know, Alice, my experience in just pastoral ministry is probably the most frightening thing for people is to know that something's wrong with their body, but no doctor can identify what it is. So they have no course or plan to take it on. They have no name to put with it. They might hear all sorts of different theories about it. How did it make you feel once they diagnosed you have celiac?
Well, I felt great. I thought I was dying. So since my mom had died of pancreatic cancer, I thought that I was dying of cancer too. And so when I finally had the name to put on it, I had celiac disease. I felt empowered that I knew what was wrong with me and that I wasn't dying. And although when the doctor told me I had to eat gluten-free, I had no idea what gluten even was. You know, you went into the supermarket at that time, and, you know, that was 24 years ago, and, you know, there weren't gluten-free products on the shelves. We actually ordered our food from Canada. Of course, you could get naturally gluten-free products, and you know, like things like the fruits and vegetables, and like look at here today what Amy is made. She's a fabulous chef and made incredible cookies and gluten-free products. But at that time, we didn't have those options.
Mm-hmm. So did your health improve right away once you got that, or was it a bit of a roller coaster journey? Was it about experimenting with things and with less options to, you know, have no shopping aisles that were gluten-free? Restaurants were probably way behind the curve on any of that, knowing what to order. How was the journey once you were diagnosed? Did you see immediate changes, or did it take a while?
Well, I started to feel better. So you know, at the time when I was diagnosed, I had a full-time job, but I was so sick. I didn't even know how you know, when you're not well, you may not even know what normal is. So as one of the signs are anemia, and people sometimes are like, well, I didn't even know because I had this iron deficiency. I started to feel better within 2 weeks. Not everybody starts to feel better immediately, but it showed me the power of how food is your medicine and how important it is to be able to absorb your nutrients. So within about a 2-week period of time, I did start to improve. My health started to improve. I mean, before that time, my hair was falling out, my teeth were starting to break. I was down to 105 pounds, and I'm 5'9", and I had these migraine headaches on a daily basis. I remember we lived on in Flowertown, and I remember turning the lights off in my room and not, you know, saying, I have a migraine, I have a migraine. I had a migraine probably every week. From the day I was diagnosed and went on a gluten-free diet, I have never had a migraine headache ever again. So you think of that, how that can alter your life. And, you know, I went back to a normal size. You know, you don't want to be, you know, 105 pounds and 5'9". And of course I had, one of the key ingredients was I had such a supportive family and friends. And my husband, Will, learned how to cook, and the family just embraced cooking gluten-free, and that you can make a lot of great products naturally gluten-free.
So tell us about your household. How does that function in terms of, we deal with the same thing when Marguerite's home. We want to be very careful that we use all separate pots, pans, and things. Everything's got to be gluten-free. We tend not to go out to dinner so that we can eat at home, be assured of what we're eating. What has that experience been like in your household? How do you arrange your kitchen and the things you bring into the home?
Oh, it's dramatically changed the way we arrange our household and our kitchen. Our kitchen is 100% gluten-free, except for there's one toaster that sits in the corner with one loaf of bread that it contains gluten, because we've come a long way with the taste and the texture, and that's part of the work that we've been able to do with Beyond Celiac. Before, in 2004, when I started the organization, it was called the National Foundation for Celiac Awareness, and we really focused on creating affordability of gluten-free products, and then we also focused on making sure that people had the opportunity to be diagnosed. So we launched a national awareness campaign, a family testing campaign, a physician education campaign. But part of that work was making sure that we educated the community itself on setting up their households. How is it that you can make sure that if somebody has celiac disease or somebody has a peanut allergy, what do you do? How do you make them feel safe? So I'm sure you know, well, we had two toasters. One toaster was a gluten-free toaster, and the other toaster was for gluten you have to worry about cross-contact or cross-contamination. So if you stick a knife in a peanut butter jar and then you take that out and you put it on the bread, you can't take that knife and put it back into that peanut butter jar. Our house, we decided to go 100% gluten-free, but except for that one loaf of bread in the toaster, some people choose not to do that. They may have family members that do not want to eat gluten-free, and you have to remember it's much more expensive to eat gluten-free. So if a family can't afford to buy all gluten-free products, you have to meet the community where they are. So there's some people and households where they really just have that separation, and they tend to label and they put stickers on the products that are gluten-free and those that contain gluten.
How about when you go out to restaurants? What we've done is we'll always make a reservation and call and check to see if there's sufficient gluten-free options and whether they take seriously gluten-free in their restaurant. And then fortunately there's a whole array of places now and opportunities. Could you tell us a little bit about that experience as well as what you've done in helping to work with chefs and restaurants in how to truly be gluten-free so they're not cooking gluten-free pasta in the same pots that they're cooking normal pasta?
Oh, well, thanks, Merrick. That was what we found with the community was feeling very isolated, that, and they weren't going out to dinner. So we heard earlier, well, you try not to go out to dinner. Or if you're in a college or a university, just think about it. Just think about the cafeteria. Think about a school cafeteria. So what we had done was, in order to increase availability and affordability of gluten-free food, we actually partnered with brands. So I'm a problem solver, so we partnered with brands, and you may not like it. Anheuser-Busch was our first partnership, and we launched the first gluten-free beer into the marketplace, because if somebody's going to cheat, they're going to cheat on beer, and they're going to cheat on pizza. And they helped us with some national awareness. And then we had events all around the country. We had our largest event in Philadelphia at the Wachovia Center, where we had 2,000 people, and we partnered doctors and chefs together to teach them about celiac disease. And we had 35 top chefs in Philadelphia, and this happened in cities around the nation. But the key to that was we had the chefs all go through a chef training program. It's our program called GREAT. And we had all the doctors go through our CME, which is a continuing medical education program. So all the chefs got trained, all the doctors got trained, and then we made it so that in Philadelphia itself, there were all these restaurants. Now you had 35 restaurants that understood how to accommodate anybody with celiac disease, or somebody with gluten sensitivity or on a gluten-free diet. So, and that's the model that we use to spread, just to train the chefs around the country. Now what we're doing is we've been focusing on training schools and universities, because it's so important that our kids can eat safely when they're in the school. And we hear many times that the kids they're not going to the school cafeteria. And 66% of the kids that go to college that have celiac disease can't eat safely in their cafeteria.
Yeah, we found that out the hard way. Even if they have one option on the university campus, it's not always easy to get to between classes. It really creates a different kind of landscape for your experience in college. What caused you to found the organization? I always love people who have that kind of entrepreneurial spirit, who want to take something on and tackle it to benefit other people. And actually, I must confess, I was at Dex Hardware buying some hardware about 6 months ago, and I saw the History of Ambler book right there, and I was leafing through it while they were adding up my supplies, and I saw your photo and listed as founding Beyond Celiac. So you're a local celebrity, to say the least. But of all the people from Ambler, I think you've had more national press than anyone, to say the least. But what sparked you to do that, and then to just grow this like you have?
Well, I have to tell you a story about Dex, too. So one day I went into Dex, and I went to sign in Dex. I don't know who knows about Dex Hardware. Okay, everybody here. I didn't ask, who has celiac disease? Can you raise your hands? Okay, there are a couple people. So I went into Dex Hardware and I went to sign my name and they're like, you don't look like a Bast, you can't, and I had to laugh because my mother-in-law and her children, have this similarity and they're like, no. And I'm like, oh, I'm married to a Bast. But now they have my book. I said, see, I'm a Bast, I'm a real Bast here. I'm probably an entrepreneur ever since I was a child. I never really thought about it until, I've been asked this question. And when I was in high school and when I was in college, I actually started some businesses. My father-in-law was like that as well. And I like to be able to solve problems, as I said earlier. And I saw that we did something called a needs assessment, and there was no national organization looking to solve this problem. And I like to be able to partner with whether it's a community group or, as you heard, I partnered with stores like Whole Foods, and I partnered with Wegmans, but then I partnered with Walmart. And no matter what you think of Walmart, Walmart it really is that 300-pound gorilla that created the opportunity to have availability and affordability of gluten-free products nationwide. So I spent months in Northwest Arkansas trying to work with Walmart, and I did work with them. And as soon as they started carrying gluten-free products nationwide, every other grocery store started to carry gluten-free products as well. And of course, along the way, the celebrities tended to help. So it became because of the speaking engagements nationwide, it was something that I hadn't anticipated, was the fact that gluten-free would become kind of a fad, right? So everybody's like, oh, and that's one of the problems that we have in restaurants. You go into a restaurant and sometimes you get an eye roll. So if you have celiac disease, you have to always look out for that little bit of an eye roll and explain. People may not want to say, I have a disease, but it's important that the disease is taken seriously. So from a time early on, I've always been an entrepreneur, and I've been a problem solver, and I look at what can I do to make that difference to solve a problem.
So you started this 14 years ago. Did you think you'd just kind of launch it and let someone else run with it? We've talked a little bit about you're building it out before, just one-on-one. Did you ever think you'd be doing this 14 years later? And along the way, what have been your biggest challenges as you've continued to expand the reach of Beyond Celiac?
Well, that's another great question. So I put this on your tables. This is actually, we have, this is our 14-year history. We put it on and you don't have to look at it right now, but when you look at your milestones and what you've accomplished, Merrick, no, I never thought I'd still be doing this 14 years later. But what I did was, when you looked and say, what could you check off your list, right? You could check off availability. We could check off affordability. I mean, I wish I had a picture of the grocery store 14 years ago. There were no gluten-free food aisles. There were no signs that said gluten-free. No restaurants, when you went into a restaurant, there weren't any labels saying that the food was gluten-free. I look at the fact that, we had a pharmacy education training program, and when I go to CVS, I have to be careful because the pharmacist will ask me a lot of questions, and I'll say, I'm not a pharmacist. So I feel that we're really, really strong on the education and the awareness. And what happened though was the messaging was taken over, I would say, by the food industry and we call it the celebritization of the gluten-free diet. So instead of the disease being taken as a serious genetic autoimmune disease that leads to cancer and other autoimmune diseases, it became, when I'd get the press asking me questions, they'd say, how did you lose weight on a gluten-free diet? And I'd say, well, no, I gained weight on a gluten-free diet because before then I wasn't absorbing my nutrients.
Television show turns off at that point, right?
The television turns off. So I didn't have, and they're like, well, tell me about, they really wanted to sensationalize it. And, I'm like, I started counting all the celebrities that had, and looking at the messages and, doing we call it the market research to understand how much information was going on studies and information about celiac disease and how much on the gluten-free diet. So that's why we rebranded the organization from the National Foundation for Celiac Awareness to Beyond Celiac, because we wanted to go beyond the gluten-free diet. We wanted to advance research in the field of celiac disease. And if you look at, right now, if I'm actually speaking later today right next to the National Institutes of Health, and I looked at their budget for autoimmunity, and there are 50 million people in the United States that have an autoimmune disease, and that's about 16% of the population, and yet only 6% of the NIH's budget is dedicated to advancing research in autoimmunity. So they spend more money on cancer, right, and heart disease, yet autoimmunity is much more common than both cancer and heart disease. So when I saw those kinds of statistics and know this is the most common autoimmune disease, I knew that we had to continue our work and advance research in the field.
So let's talk about the I need you to get your microphone probably going back out, pointing out this way. Perfect, great.
Okay. How come yours is staying put?
Because I have big ears. Yeah. So a question for you is, from what I gather, you've tried to get the players together in the room. So if everyone here was a specialist focused on one particular autoimmune disease, and you're all raising money for your own particular cause and trying to eliminate that disease, from what I gather, you've tried to get everyone in the room and say, everything we're doing, we all face the same issue. Why don't we work together? Is that right? And if so, how successful has that been so far? And how can you continue to bring people together to focus on what you share in common and to try to make a big headway?
That's an excellent question. Always great questions. In 2015, we held our first ever International Research Summit. And as Merrick mentioned, we brought together not only scientists and clinicians, industry, so the pharmaceutical companies, the NIH, but we brought together other autoimmune diseases. And the other key to this research summit was we had patients in the room. So you heard the word patient-centric before. So we had patients working with us on understanding and created a research summit where we looked at the gaps in the field. So I had top doctors from the Mayo Clinic, from Harvard, from all around the country, actually internationally, but they were able to talk to the patient community and patients from Iowa, patients from areas that may not have a major research center nearby. And as importantly as bringing the patients in the room, we also brought together other autoimmune diseases and what could we learn from these diseases. And an example of that was a top researcher studying MS started talking to one of our top researchers who's studying celiac disease. They formed a partnership, a relationship, and a pharmaceutical company invested in this, and now they're going to look at potentially curing, really creating a vaccine for celiac disease and for MS together. So the power of bringing in some of these top immunologists to work with our gastroenterologists is, what do they have in common? And it's celiac disease, because when we eat gluten, so if I tell you a little bit more about the disease itself. So celiac disease is a genetic autoimmune disease, the most common disease. And when somebody like myself who has celiac disease eats gluten, it sets off that immune response and the body attacks itself. This happens in other autoimmune diseases where the body attacks itself, but they don't know that antigen. They don't have that. We have the protein component of gluten, and we know what that, we have that trigger. So we can be very well studied in scientific studies. And so we're able to work together with other autoimmune diseases so that all of us could live life more fully and potentially have a better quality of life.
So when you have celiac disease, it shuts down the villi, I believe, in the digestive tract. So you can be eating the most healthy food in the world, but you're not harnessing the benefits of that. Is that correct?
That's correct. So when you eat as Merrick said, so when you eat gluten, it blunts the villi. So they're supposed to look like this. This is the villi in your intestines. And what happens is they get blunted. And then none of your nutrients are absorbed. And you're just not gaining any of the nutritional value. Now, the other aspect of that is you don't have to be skinny to have celiac disease. Some people, before they're diagnosed, they actually gain a great deal of weight. So that's been just because somebody isn't, looked malnourished, doesn't mean that they're not malnourished.
If someone, because the symptoms are so widespread and so diverse, if someone senses maybe this is something that, I have, could they try on a gluten-free diet to see how that affects them?
No, they should not. They should not try a gluten-free diet, because what happens, Merrick, is that it's really important to get tested. So you have to keep eating gluten, and then once you keep eating gluten, you create the antibodies, and you should then get tested by your doctor. And if the blood test, it's a blood test, if it comes back positive, then you should go on a gluten-free diet, so that you know that you have celiac disease, because there's about 6% of the population have gluten sensitivity, so they don't feel when they eat gluten. So you need to know whether or not you have celiac disease, or if you have a gluten sensitivity.
And I understand you have a high sensitivity. You can take one bite of a meal in a restaurant, and there's gluten in it, even if it was advertised as gluten-free. Is that correct?
Yes, and not everybody has that, but if I have any food that potentially has gluten in it, I get a neurologic, I get tingling. I don't know if Marguerite has that reaction. Just recently, what we learned, so you keep learning all the time, is I was eating these fancy mushrooms, and a friend of ours actually gave us this box, and I was sick the entire night. And then I started doing some research, and it turns out that this variety of mushrooms was grown in rye. So you can't have any products with wheat, rye, or barley. And it turned out that the mushrooms were grown in rye, and a lot of mushrooms, like portobello, they're not grown in rye. So my body is highly reactive, so I know when I get gluten.
So what would have happened if you had never been diagnosed with celiac? What do you think would have happened to you, Alice?
Unfortunately, I think if I was not diagnosed with celiac disease, I probably would have ended up with cancer and died. I was so sick. When I think about my nails, when I think about my hair, when I think about the fact that everything I ate was, I couldn't retain anything, I don't think I'd be here today.
And if someone has celiac, do they have to be on a really strict diet, or can they just start to moderate things gently?
See, that's what is tricky about celiac disease. About 30 to 40% of the people with celiac disease don't really have outward symptoms that are so severe like mine, and they think that they can have a little bit of gluten. But if you have a little bit of gluten, it actually causes inflammation, and that inflammation leads to things like other autoimmune diseases, so a cascade of autoimmune diseases, or cancer. So it's really important to have a 100% gluten-free diet. That means no cross-contact. That means no cheating. That means I'll have gluten once a month. You can't have any gluten.
So what's the biggest challenge facing the celiac field today, and how is your organization addressing that?
Our biggest challenge is having the disease taken seriously, and properly funded. I had the opportunity to educate the FDA and to work with the FDA on understanding celiac disease. And many times the medical community and even some of the government agencies really didn't understand the seriousness of the disease, because the fad overshadowed it, celiac disease. And also the fact that there's a myth that the gluten-free diet is enough. And it really is not enough, because it's really hard to live gluten-free in a gluten-containing world. And it's really important that we have therapeutic alternatives and advanced research in the area. So I would say that it's the seriousness and the funding into the field.
Where do you see the field going 10 years from now?
I see there's a huge opportunity for celiac disease to be the disease that unlocks all of autoimmune diseases, and that there's research by 10 different biotech pharmaceutical companies, 10 to 12 companies, looking to advance research into understanding all kinds of things, like the natural history of the disease, which means the patient journey, and what goes on with people that one day they could be fine, and another day they end up with an autoimmune disease, just like as we talked about with Marguerite. Where is it? As we're looking to collect data in our field, because we don't have enough data, and we have on our website a research opt-in where the community can opt into research. Is once we start putting those dots together and collecting that data, and we start to see patterns, just as I wrote one of the first articles published on reproductive health and celiac disease, we need to be looking more into, well, we traveled, and Marguerite, you traveled, I traveled. What was in common there? We both had, there was a parasite, or we had, what was it that triggered that autoimmune response? And I think that understanding the triggers of these diseases is going to be really important. And then potentially, a cure for the disease. So that's what I see coming down the pike in the next 10 years.
Let me take you into a spiritual realm for a minute, because I think you're a very spiritual person. And I believe everyone's on a spiritual journey. You can't go through something like you've gone through without becoming more aware of that. Everything from your mortality to, am I dealing with this alone? And then it transforms you to do something for others. Our lesson today in Scripture was about Jesus raising Lazarus from the tomb. We don't know a lot about what happened to Lazarus after that, but my experience is people who've been in a tomb experience or a dark, difficult situation, they either flee from that and never want to get near it, or they want to help others in a similar situation once they've gotten far enough away from that, and they become great agents of healing. How has this journey affected you spiritually?
That's a great question. I would say that I am, I feel really blessed to have an answer and know that I have celiac disease, and to know that and I thought for a long time, should I be doing this work? Should I quit my job? My dad had died of cancer, and I thought, and I was working, for a for-profit organization, and I thought, what do I want? What do I want with my life? When I look back, if I reflect on my life, what is it? That I want? What do I want to be remembered for? And I thought that because of my talents and because of my background, that I really could help others, and felt like that was, my original calling as a healer. I always felt very drawn to helping people, whatever it was, and that I needed to go back into the field where I could truly make a difference and help people be well and be able to live out their life. And I do think it's a calling, and it made me, the little things don't bother me as much, when you think about it, and I, thank God every day that I have a diagnosis. And when people say, gosh, that's the story of having a stillbirth, that's so tragic. And I think, well, maybe there was a reason for that. Maybe all of that, there's a reason that I was put in this place. And a lot of times, as Merrick was saying, through suffering, we're able to help others.
Mm-hmm. As you speak, I think of one of my favorite passages in any book is Frederick Buechner wrote a little book called The Theological ABCs. And so for every letter, there is a word that he's chosen, and he gives a definition of it. And under V, he chooses vocation. And he said, vocation comes from the Latin word vocare, which means to call out. And he said, it usually involves where your giftedness meets something where there's a need. So he said, if for instance, you write TV deodorant commercials and get a great kick out of doing that, you've probably met criteria A, where you're putting your gifts to work, but it probably isn't doing the world an enormous amount of good necessarily. He said, but on the other hand, if you work at a leper colony, but you're downright miserable, you've probably met criteria B, but you probably haven't met criteria A, and you're probably not doing the lepers a whole lot of good either. They said, our vocation is where the deep gladness of our heart, which comes from using our giftedness, meets the deep needs of the world. And you clearly have done that through your work. So we are so grateful to have you with us today. Could you close by just giving us 3 takeaways that we might leave here with today about celiac?
Sure. Thank you, Merrick. I love that. So the 3 takeaways is, if you think you might have celiac disease, don't go gluten-free. Get tested. Stay on a gluten-containing diet, and ask your doctor to get tested for celiac disease. The second takeaway would be, if you do have celiac disease or a member in your family, opt into research. We have a research opt-in, and it's really important for everybody to get involved, because we're going to learn through data, we're going to learn through sharing information, just as I did. How I ended up writing and authoring a paper on reproductive health was I was speaking. I had a support group in Abington, and there was about 200 people in the support group, and I asked them to raise their hands of who had different symptoms. And through that participation of just the people that were in that support group, it ended up showing me how important it was for people to share information, and I authored the paper, and then also we got a grant from the National Institute of Health for the work we did. So opt into research. And the third takeaway is what I said earlier. Know that there's hope, and that celiac disease might be the disease. I'm not going to guarantee it, that unlocks all of autoimmunity, but that's been written up in Scientific American by top scientists, and there is hope for a future for a world that might be free from autoimmunity, so that we can all live healthier, happier lives. And thank you all for being here today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Do you have time for a question or two? If someone...
Sure.
Are there any questions out there that haven't been asked that you want to make sure we cover today?
Go ahead. Yes. If the question is, if you are eating gluten-free and you go to get tested, does that affect the test? And it does affect the test. Then you're not making antibodies, so your test results will not be accurate. What you can do in that case is you can get a genetic test to see if you have the gene for celiac disease, but about 30 to 40% of the population has the gene. So it doesn't mean that you have celiac disease. It just means you have the gene. You actually have to be on a gluten-containing diet to be properly tested for celiac.
Great. Dick, one final question, please go ahead.
Would you say that the perception is that gluten-free foods are good, and a lot of people who don't eat them are taking them because it seems to be fashionable?
Yes, I would say that's a very good observation. You can't, it's not going to hurt you eating gluten-free foods, but the gluten-free foods may not have, especially in some of they may not be fortified with the nutrition that their gluten-containing counterparts. They also might be more caloric. So you really have to read. I tell everybody, read labels, read the ingredients. Eat as naturally as you possibly could. I mean, when I said there wasn't gluten-free products in the supermarket, the whole perimeter of the supermarket is naturally gluten-free. The best foods you can eat are those that are naturally gluten-free that we all eat. But it is, sometimes people, just as fad diets are started, eating gluten-free became part of that fad trend. So if you don't have celiac disease or gluten sensitivity, you don't have to eat gluten-free. Now, some people that have autoimmune diseases and a lot of inflammation feel that they're doing better on a gluten-free diet. And we need to research and understand why is it. Is that a placebo effect, or is that real, that people are actually feeling better on a gluten-free diet? But we need to study that.
Thank you all for your attention today, and we'll continue looking at important topics. And if you have suggestions for us, please let me know. We'd love to hear from you. On the week before we do an interview with the speaker, you're always welcome to send questions to me as well so that we can bring them up. Thank you, Alice, for being so generous with your time
Oh, thank
today
you.
and for your leadership.